Cicero is a fantastic character. He's very good from a novelist's point of view. He's someone of whom almost everyone has heard, but almost nobody can tell you anything about him, except that he was a famous speaker. He left behind an enormous amount of material, more than 800 letters, 58 speeches, 14 books. We know more about Cicero than almost anyone else from the ancient world, and so I had all that material available. And he's a marvellously modern character. He was quite devious, he was cunning, he was very, very funny. He was this brilliant lawyer. He was the best lawyer in Rome. He's just very accessible to a modern reader. He wasn't a kind of soldier or a sort of psychopath, really, as so many of those Romans were. He hated cruelty. He disliked the games. He's a very accessible figure for a modern writer and reader. Cicero is a pragmatic politician who trims his position according to what is the popular mood, and therefore I certainly saw in him parallels within my country, Tony Blair, and in here perhaps a Bill Clinton figure. In 54 BC, Cicero says, "Consistency has never been regarded as a great virtue in a statesman. Our language changes, but our aim remains the same." And hearing that, it sounded across 2,000 years, New Democrats, or in my country, New Labour, to a T. I set myself a rule in writing about real-life figures, which is that I will never do anything which is blatantly factually incorrect. I use the framework of fact and I draw inferences from what we know. And in some areas of Cicero's life, I don't have to invent very much at all. As I say, we have 58 speeches of his, so I was able to incorporate those and some of the letters into the novel. Other areas, his relationship with his wife, for instance, of course, I have to do all the work there. We know a few things about his wife. She was a pretty formidable woman. Again, quite modern. To push the historical parallels again, you might say a kind of Hillary Clinton, in that she was a strong figure behind the scenes, except, of course, she wasn't able to stand for office herself. The key thing about women in Rome was that they had the ability to have their own money. This gave them terrific influence, and unlike the ancient Greeks, the women were far more central in Roman life. They couldn't stand for office, they couldn't vote, but they did a lot behind the scenes to shape society, and there are several really very powerful women from the late Roman Republic, such as Servilia, who was Caesar's mistress and Brutus's mother, and Fulvia, who was married to Mark Antony. I mean, these were women of enormous power. It's a great period, ancient Rome, and there are so many parallels with our own time, and it's a great way of writing about our own time. I've always been interested in politics, and there was just this concentration of brilliant politicians in Rome about 2,000 years ago, and I thought to describe what happened to them would be a very good way of universalizing politics and the struggle of politics. I did 2 years uninterrupted, solid research for this book. I went and bought the 29 volumes of Cicero's writings, which we have, and I went through those, and one thing led to another, really. I started reading more and more material, read the ancient historians like Plutarch, and I went to Rome and walked around and was shown where Cicero's house probably stood, and stood in the Forum. But it has to be said that, unlike my last novel, Pompeii, where you can go back and really get the feel of a place, Republican Rome, and we're dealing here in my book in the 1st century BC. Republican Rome has virtually disappeared. It was built over by the emperors, let alone by modern Rome. So actually there wasn't too much I could see physically. Cicero was the figure who unlocked the book for me, actually. I have this wealth of material, 500,000 words of research files that I'd typed myself, an enormous cast of characters, but I needed to find some way of making it coherent. And I hit on the idea of writing the novel through the eyes of Cicero, who was Cicero's secretary for more than 30 years, who did exist, who invented shorthand, oddly enough. He was the man who invented the ampersand. He lived to be nearly 100, and he did actually write a memoir of Cicero, which was lost in the Dark Ages when the Roman Republic collapsed. So I thought, well, why don't I recreate this memoir? And so I approached the book rather as if it's the President of the United States as Chief of Staff recollecting the rise to power of the President 30 years later. That was my kind of model, to give the book a fresh and modern feel.